Good day, I'm Elizabeth Nosek, and I work here at the Colorado Railroad Museum as the Curator of Education and Exhibits. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines communication as the act or process of using words, sounds, signs, or behaviors to express or exchange information to someone else. To keep trains running safely and on time, railroaders definitely needed to communicate with each other. But until the invention of the two-way radio and portable telephone, most of this talk was done without words. Trains move on fixed rails, making it easier for them to collide. So throughout railroads' history, train crews, track workers, dispatchers, and technicians have all communicated using sight, sound, and codes in an effort to keep train travel safer at night, across distances, and during challenging weather conditions. We still use many of the methods developed for early train travel today. For this Small Wonders, I invite you to join me in taking a closer look at our upper gallery exhibit, entitled Without Words, Communicating Along the Railroad. It explores how railroads moved the message using sight, sound, and codes. In the early days of railroads, each individual line had their own signals for communicating, but as railroads became more and more interconnected, these signals were standardized so that everyone was speaking the same language. Colors were integral to this system. Using flags and lanterns along with hand signals, railroaders could speak without saying a word. What do colors tell the person looking at them? Well, a red signal means stop. On the railroad, it can also warn of dangerous conditions ahead. Yellow is a signal to slow down or proceed with caution. If you see a blue lantern or signal, it means that there is a stopped train with railroad employees working under or around it. A green signal lets the trains know that you can proceed. The traffic lights we use on the road for car travel were adapted from the railroad signal system. Today's red, yellow, and green continue to tell us to stop, move with caution, or go. Today's diesel locomotives use incredibly powerful horns to speak over the sounds made by a train as it moves along the track. The 19th century Americans were quite familiar with the bells and whistles of passing trains punctuating their lives. Train whistles came in many pitches, sizes, as well as different tones or chords. In fact, many communities could identify a train just by the sound of its whistle. Whistles, bells, and horns have their own language on the railroad. They use various combinations of long and short bursts of sound to communicate their messages. For instance, a series of short blasts is sounded to communicate an emergency. A long blast, followed by 3 short ones, tells the flagman to protect the rear of the train, while the opposite, 3 short blasts and 1 long blast, tells the flagman to protect the front of the train. 2 long tones tell rail workers to release the brakes and proceed. These are just a few of the signals sent to keep the trains moving and everyone safe. The invention of the telegraph revolutionized long-distance communication. Samuel Morse sent the first message between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. in 1844 with these famous words, "What hath God wrought?" By transmitting electrical pulses over a wire laid between stations with these pulses encoded into a language known as Morse code, what used to take weeks could now be communicated in minutes or even seconds. With telegraph lines sending their first train orders in 1851, railroads and telegraph companies were natural partners from almost the very beginning. Railroads provided the right-of-way needed for telegraph poles and wires. The private owners of the telegraph system, such as Western Union, could use the wires to send messages between customers for a fee. In turn, railroad companies were allowed to use the lines for official communications, including dispatching. Telegraphs not only made train travel safer, but also railroads could schedule more trains and move people and goods faster. The first telegraph line going through Colorado reached Julesburg in August of 1861. Telegrams were then taken by horse or stagecoach to Denver up until 1863. Rates for 10 words were $7 to St. Louis and $9 to Boston or New York. As I developed this exhibit, I was struck by how similar people's response to new technology was. As we embrace new technologies brought to us by the internet, we are at the same time familiar with concerns expressed over social media, such as TikTok, Twitter, and blogging. 19th century Americans had similar concerns with the telegraph. In August of 1858, the New York Times published an article on the benefits and evils of the transatlantic telegraph. And I quote, "So far as the influence of the newspaper upon the mind and morals of the people is concerned, there can be no rational doubt that the telegraph has caused vast injury. Superficial, sudden, unsifted, too fast for the truth must be all telegraphic intelligence. Does it not render the popular mind too fast for the truth? 10 days brings us the mails from Europe. What need is there for scraps of news in 10 minutes? How trivial and paltry is the telegraphic column. It snowed here, it rained there, one man killed, another man hanged. Even the Washington letter has deteriorated since the innovation, and I can conscientiously recommend my own epistles prior to 1844, in preference to those of later years. That it will be of very great use cannot be questioned, but how will its uses add to the happiness of mankind? Has it banished any evil, mitigated any sorrow?" It sounds kind of familiar to me. In the 1870s, the telephone was invented to transmit speech electrically over wires strung between stations. Railroads adopted this new technology slowly, using selectors to allow individual stations to be contacted for train dispatching. By 1925, railroad mileage dispatched by telephones exceeded that dispatched by the telegraph. Railroads also began experimenting with two-way radios in the early 20th century, but it wasn't until after World War II that technological improvements allowed railroads to begin using VHF radios more widely. Even though words are used with telephones and radios, railroads require additional steps to be taken for the sake of safety. Train crews must repeat each telephonic or radio message back to the dispatcher, word for word and spelled out, and dispatchers typically record in writing exactly what they tell the train crew, and then underline each word as it is repeated back to them. With or without words, safety remains of paramount concern in the railroad environment. As you see, communication is an integral part of railroads. As a matter of fact, without the tools used for communication, railroads could not operate. I hope you will visit the museum's exhibit, Without Words, Communicating Along the Railroad. It will be featured here in our upper gallery through late fall of 2022.
Like, comment, share, and subscribe. Commenting and sharing in particular may qualify as virtual engagements for important funding programs like the SCFD.